Hi there, and welcome to The Artist Craft. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran, and today's guest is going to be Alexandra Sokoloff, author of The Harrowing. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
I'm thrilled to be here, thanks.
So for the next half hour or so, we're going to be asking a lot of questions about how Alex became a writer, some of her background as a screenwriter as well, some of her background in California, and the road and path that led her to be a successful novelist. So how did growing up in California as a young person influence you?
Well, I didn't just grow up in California, I grew up in Berkeley, which is just not like any other place in the universe. Mm-hmm. It's a good atmosphere for a writer because it's so surreal that you learn to think in fictional terms. But I think that what you're really getting at, knowing you, is that California made it very easy for me to decide to go into the arts as a profession because that's where people go to do that kind of thing. And there's a whole mythos about California that it's the gold rush. You go there to make your fortune, you go there for fame and fortune, there's the whole Hollywood thing. You grew up with that as it's the dream machine. So I think that I was very privileged to have been born there because it always made it possible to pursue my dream.
Sure, and so how did your parents influence your decision early on to go into the arts?
Oh, they hated it. I mean, no parent wants their kid to go into the arts, you know, because they have a genetic, I think, understanding of how hard it is. My parents are scientists. They didn't get that at all. And they really wanted me to go into something, well, science first, or something logical and practical, law, or be a doctor, or any of those things. So, no, they're still stunned that I'm making a living at this.
But now as a kid, you played classical piano, right?
Well, yeah. At the same time that they were trying to get us to do practical things, we were being trained, my brother and sister and I, in arts and music and dance and all of it, and going to museums. So they really gave us all those art. And I say to this day, Mom, what did you think was going to happen? You know. So yeah, they gave us the background without really knowing it.
Do you still play the piano today?
Not when anyone's listening.
But you actually have a piano.
Oh yeah, I do have a piano in the house. It's very relaxing. I mean, it's a great way to work out story problems.
I know in The Harrowing you referenced the marriage of Figaro early on as one of the students is listening to that down the hallway or something.
Right, yeah, well I went to Berkeley as a school too, and I knew a lot of opera singers, so yeah, that was just part of my Berkeley experience, I guess. Mm-hmm.
Now, describe the experience of directing a play at 16, is that right?
Yeah, I had been acting since I was just a kid. That was the first thing that I fell in love with. Yeah, I wanted to do a senior class play, and there wasn't a senior class play going on. And so I just said, well, let's do it. Mm-hmm. And I had been taking theater classes, and I was interested in the big picture. So, at 16, really got off on the power that being a director is, because suddenly everyone, and it was all like the popular students, and everybody wanted to be in the play, and I had total and absolute control over their lives. It was really quite a rush.
So how did you select the material that you used for the play? What was the play that you actually performed?
That was an easy call. MASH was a hugely popular TV show when I was in high school. Everybody was it was like the last year or something, and everybody watched it. And we had many more guys who were interested in doing it, and there is a play version of MASH that a lot of high schools put on, and it was just a no-brainer that was the one that we could cast, and it was a blast. It came off so well, and you know, when you have that successful an experience, you're going to, of course, keep going with it.
Now, right around that same time, you lived in Istanbul, Turkey, correct?
Yes, I was an exchange
experience?
student.
What was that experience like?
That was really hard. It was the most transformative experience of my life.
How old were you?
I was 16. I did that before I directed the play, actually. It actually came in that progression. I spent the summer I graduated early, so, or no, I didn't, I had skipped a grade. Anyway, I got out of there as soon as I could. So I went to Turkey for a summer. It was 4 months total. And it was really, really hard. I was 16 years old, blonde American teenager, on my own. It's still, I mean, it was at the time, and I imagine it still is, a very sexist country. And I was in danger all the time. I would go out on the street, I would be sexually harassed. There were abduction attempts. It's amazing that I lived through it. But it's also an amazing historical place to be. Being on my own and being in that kind of danger was really transformative as a writer, because I was totally in my own head and totally independent at that age. And it also, I really thought at 16 that I was going to die any minute, you know, that I could die any minute. And usually you have that experience in your 40s and 50s, like it's called a midlife crisis, when you realize you're going to die and you might as well do what you want, and you go off and do crazy things. I did that when I was 16, and that's when I decided to just never mind what my parents had programmed me toward, a rational professional life.
So was it primarily the experience of living in Turkey that caused that, sort of premature anxiety, or was that something that was in place before living in Turkey?
No, it was totally about Turkey. It was that I was so lucky to live in the U.S. because of the opportunity we have here, because as a woman, you can do what men do in this country. Any place else, you're pretty much screwed. And that idea that I was going to die, I could die, so I was going to, if I ever survived the experience, do what I wanted to do, what I loved, which was, at the time, acting.
Now, were you writing at that age between, say, 16 and 20?
I wasn't, except in journals, which is everybody who ends up a writer probably journals. And I would, when I directed things, I would write incidental stuff. I wrote a couple of musical reviews, but I wasn't thinking about being a writer at the time. It was just part of the theatrical experience.
So how did your theater experience at UC Berkeley then shape you, and how was that transition? So it sounds like you were interested in theater, maybe despite your parents' better judgment, in your teen years.
That's
and
right.
You get to Berkeley, you're a smart, bright student, top of the class type student, and you decide to go the theater route, is that right?
Yeah. Well, I had decided in Turkey that I would major in theater. Before, I was going to be a psychologist or a lawyer. And in Turkey, it was just like, no, I'm going into theater. But I didn't tell my parents that. I just waited till I went to Berkeley, and once I was out of the house and my siblings were, they just wanted us to get a liberal education, and they weren't looking over our shoulders. So I just majored in theater.
And you were doing some singing at the time, right?
Yes.
As well. Now, were you seriously considering going into singing at that point, or was it just sort of a lark?
Oh, it was just part of the whole theater training. I did a lot of musical theater. That was what I was best at. I actually am a much better dancer than singer, and I love being in musicals. Shakespeare and musicals, it's my favorite performance. So no, I was never serious about it.
So talk a little bit about how that experience at Berkeley, and particularly in the theater program, shaped you as a writer today. Do you think it did?
It had everything to do with what kind of writer I am and the fact that I'm a writer. Theater training, I think, is the best background you can have as a writer. You have to walk through a story as an actor. As a choreographer, you have to put together the whole flow and sensuality of a story. As a director, you have to deal with the visual. You have to deal with structural issues. You learn